Welcome to another edition of Green is Good. This is the ISRI edition of Green is Good, and we're so honored to have with us today Tom Knippel. He's the Vice President of Commercial Recycling for SA Recycling. Welcome to Green is Good, Tom.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you today. And before we get talking about SA Recycling, can you please share with our audience a little bit your own journey, your own story leading up to joining SA Recycling and your history in the recycling business and with ISRI?
You know, recycling started for me in college when I took an environmental studies course. And this is many years ago, Wisconsin.
There you go.
University of Wisconsin. Go Badgers.
Go Badgers.
I have to put a plug, NCAA. They should have won. But anyway, I always had an interest in conservation and the environment, and the outdoors always fascinated me. And I saw some of the things that were going on, so I took an interest, but that's not how I got in the industry. I actually worked for Time Warner was my first career. And I worked in cable television for 6-7 years in Wisconsin, and traveled the country for them. And the travel was getting a little excessive, so I decided, what can I do that's going to keep me local with my kids? And it was a serendipitous find for me. I found a scrap company that was regional in the Wisconsin area, and they liked me, I liked them, and what they'll tell you in the scrap industry is you either love it or hate it. And if you love it, you'll never leave it. And that was over 25 years ago, and I've been there ever since.
That's great. And then our common friend George Adams recruited you to come out to SA Recycling at some point?
He did. I've known George for quite a while. We both serve on the ISRI Board of Directors, and we have a common interest in this business. And over the years, George is a leader in this industry, and I admired him greatly. And when he presented the offer for me to come out to work for him, I'd been with the same company for 22 years, but I reached a point where I just couldn't say no. He's that type of person, and it's been a great adventure for me.
That's great. And for our listeners to learn more, and our audience to learn more about SA Recycling and Tom's great company, you could go to www.sarecycling.com.
Absolutely.
Now, I've been to your facilities, one of your facilities, and I've seen the massive amount of machinery down there, and we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about more specifically car recycling. What happens when people are done driving their car and a car comes to its regular end of life? Where does it go? We all have these cartoonish pictures in our mind of cars being put into like a rectangle cube or something like that. But there's a different story to what real recycling looks like in the car shredding industry. Can you share with our listeners, tee up a little bit about what happens at a car's end of life?
And thank you, Hollywood, for that misinformation on cubing cars. There were old movies, and it was always great when they put these cars in this compressor and made it into a bale. But what's really replaced that technology is the shredder, today's shredder, which is a phenomenal engineering wonder. Huge machinery that separates the car. But prior to getting to the shredder, cars need to go through several processes. And there's an intermediary process when a car comes to the end of its useful life driving. There's a second life for it, and that is it goes to the boneyard, and its parts are then resold. Because when your car gets broken or dented, as opposed to buying a brand new fender, what they'll usually do is go to a junkyard, an auto salvage yard, to get a fender, a hood, a doorknob. So the cars are cannibalized for their parts in the auto recycling industry prior to them coming to us.
Gotcha.
And in most cases, automobiles today are also depolluted before coming, because there's several processes in the shredding process that have to be done prior to a car being shredded.
Such as, what does depolluting mean in the car shredding industry?
In everything that we manufacture, there are elements of concern, items of concern. And in an automobile, to function and give us the type of luxury that we like today, there's many components. And I guess the most common one that people would recognize was, and this goes back a few years, when you popped your trunk and the light came on. Well, that light came on because there was a switch in it that had mercury in it. And when it went up, the mercury fell down and made the connection. And when it went down, it went the other way and disconnected, turned the light on and off. So mercury has to be removed, the mercury switches. That's just one element, and they stopped using mercury in cars today, but we're still seeing the old cars come in. So
Gotcha.
we remove mercury switches, Batteries, which are made of lead, have to be removed. Fluids, you have all sorts of fluids in a vehicle. There's oil in the engine, there's transmission fluid, there's brake fluid, there's antifreeze. So all of these elements of concern have to be removed prior to the shredding process.
So all the hazardous materials, hazardous to the environment materials, are taken out first.
Correct.
Prior to them being put through one of your processes. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what the process looks like. What I saw was a big shredder. Can you explain how shredding, as you pointed out a couple minutes ago, revolutionized from the big block image of a car being recycled, how shredding revolutionized it, and what do one of these shredders look like, and how are they manufactured, and how much do they cost?
Sure, a lot. It's a lot of machinery.
Right.
But I'll give just a quick history of the recycling of automobiles.
Yeah,
because years ago, prior to shredders, literally men, and it was men that did it, took axes to a car and chopped it up. And before they did that, they actually set them on fire, which, if you can imagine how environmentally friendly that would be, burning plastic and foam and so on. And that's how they removed the non-metallic parts from it. And then taking it apart with axes to cut it in pieces small enough to send back into the mill. So it was a very labor-intensive process, a very environmentally unfriendly process to do. So, at some point they would get these cars cleaned up and then they would cube them, because when you melt in a steel mill, you need a certain density for efficiency. And that's what shredding does too. Part of the shredding process is making density. But this evolution, when shredders were first invented in the 50s, was revolutionary in that you were able to process a larger volume of cars, break them down by their components, and separate them into the components so that they could be reused. So it was revolutionary introduction to the industry.
Gotcha. And so where is it now? Like, how are the shredders evolved, and what do you build now on one of your facilities?
A shredder today can take up a city block, and larger in some cases. They can be 3 to 5 stories tall when you have all the components put together. But it basically consists of an in-feed conveyor that's bringing them up to the shredder itself.
Right. The
shredder, which is a Hammermill. And then after it comes out of the shredder, going on various conveyors, air systems, and separation of the components that come out of the shredder.
Gotcha. And the air systems on the back end and the conveyors on the back end are to separate the different commodities that are coming out of the car?
Correct. The shredding process itself, and some people think of, when they hear the word shredding, they think of paper shredding, and it's really nothing like it. The end product is to break it down in smaller pieces, which is the same. But a shredder, it's also called a hammer mill.
Okay.
And there's a very large shaft in the middle that can weigh 50,000 pounds that rotates at about 500 revolutions per minute. And attached to that are approximately 30 hammers, and each hammer can weigh 250 to 1,250 pounds.
Wow.
And this is spinning at 500 revolutions per minute inside a closed chamber. And as material is fed in, these hammers come around and they actually tear the car apart. So there's a large clamp at the opening of the shredder that holds the car in place so it doesn't get pulled in too fast.
Right.
But it's continually ripping apart that car inside the shredder. And in the bottom of the shredder, the top is solid and the bottom looks almost like a sewer grate. So all this material, the shredding is really 2 processes. It breaks all the components apart, because in a car you have steel, you have aluminum, you have stainless steel, copper, foam, plastic, glass, and all these components have to be separated. That's what the first part of shredding does. The second part is, as it forces this broken up material through this grate in the bottom, it forces it into ball size, fist-sized balls, which densifies the steel product.
Okay.
And then you have all this material coming out on the back end. And the first separation occurs is the easiest, is magnetic separation. Steel is ferrous, so it's magnetic. Everything else is non-magnetic. So the first system are these large drums on conveyors that will pick up the steel and take it one way.
Got it.
So that's our steel product.
Steel's taken out first.
Absolutely. But there's some components in there. Every car is equipped with a starter to start your car. The starter is like an electric motor. It has copper inside, but it's wrapped around steel. So the magnet picks that up too. So even in the mechanized systems today, there is some level of hand separation as the material is coming out.
But
the rest of the material goes onto a conveyor system of separation, because we want to get the aluminum separated from the copper, separated from the stainless steel, separated from the plastic, glass, and foam. And we do that through a series of, the technology uses rare earth magnets that expel the metals at different rates. And we set up dividers so that the aluminum gets thrown the longest, the copper is heavier, it gets, based on density, gets thrown the least. So actually in the industry there's a term for aluminum that comes out of shredders called long throw aluminum, because it's thrown the furthest. So, but the system is, the technology is so good today that we can separate out all these components and get maximum recovery of the
higher value,
core.
higher value,
and more elements coming back into use as opposed to being landfilled.
So besides value and what you just mentioned, less landfill, what are the other benefits? Is it just an environmentally better system than crushing the cars?
It's an environmentally better system, but it also increases the melt capacity at a steel mill. You know, their efficiencies improve by a densified, pure, homogeneous product, a cleaner product. So there's efficiencies all the way along the line, but what we like to look at are probably the biggest, though, are the environmental savings. You know, when you produce any material from a recycled component versus mining raw materials, you're saving virgin materials, you're saving natural resources.
Lots of energy.
Lots of energy. Yeah, an average car, you'll save over 500 gallons in energy savings on one vehicle and 8,000 pounds of CO2 emissions.
Wow. So if you take a car going into one of your facilities, it's like you said, it has to be decontaminated first. Mm-hmm. After decontamination, after the parts have been harvested from it prior to coming to your facility, what percentage of the car actually is getting shred and going back into resource, reassignment and reallocation?
And the goal, obviously, for a cost benefit is to maximize that.
Right.
You say, just like with everything else, we want to get everything out of the hog, including the squeal. And SA Recycling, our owner George Adams, is by far the expert in that category to systems. But we'll maximize recovery. An average car is 70+% steel, 3 to 4% non-ferrous metals, being aluminum, copper, and stainless, and the rest is the residuals, what we call the automobile shredder residue, which may contain plastic, foam, glass, and those components. There's technology being worked on right now, and this was only recently approved by working with the EPA to start harvesting more materials, so we could get up to close to 90% recovery out of the vehicles.
Really?
Yeah.
So, and I want to come back to the issue of steel in a second. For our listeners and our audience that's just joined us, we've got Tom Knippel. He's the Vice President of Commercial Recycling for SA Recycling. You can find SA Recycling at www.sarecycling.com. We're doing the ISRI Green is Good special here in downtown Vancouver at the Vancouver Convention Center. And we're talking about car and automobile recycling with Tom. You mentioned historically how much you can recycle out of a car nowadays and what it's made out of in terms of steel and other items. Is there a change, a sea change coming now with all these cars becoming much more sustainable and hybrids and the CAFE standards that we have? Is there less steel and more aluminum and other products and carbon products going into the making of cars, and how is that affecting how you create and build and design your shredders?
And the answer is yes. And the challenge is, how do you recover the maximum amount of materials, both economically and efficiently?
Yeah.
So, and just to give you some groundwork on the amount of materials that are recycled annually in the U.S., 138 million tons, 70 million tons of steel. The United States produces about 100 million tons per year of steel. 70% of that comes from recycled steel. Wow. So we're talking some phenomenal numbers in terms of the amount of materials. But it is reducing. Aluminum is replacing steel in cars for fuel efficiency. We have the CAFE standards, and we want cars to get more miles per gallon.
Right.
Batteries are being used instead of gas-powered engines. So the recycling process changes. And one of the things that ISRI took the forefront on years ago, and actually trademarked the term design for recycling, is working with auto manufacturers, working with engineers, working with manufacturers of all products to design their products to maximize the recycling. And that includes removing the hazardous materials. If there's no mercury in to begin with, it's much easier to recycle. And if something's put together with 2 bolts instead of 32, you can dismantle it manually to recover something prior to being shredded. So, but the shredding process is still for many years going to be there as the base component for recycling automobiles, appliances, and other light gauge steels.
Do the tires get recycled?
The tires are removed prior to, in most cases, being recycled so that they don't fall into a waste stream, because there are many beneficial uses today for tires, and they are recycled. That's a big part of the ISRI's
So they get
component.
recycled from a different recycling?
From a different recycler, right,
Wow.
from rubber.
So really, as our audience sees these scrap yards and they drive by them, the old Sanford and Son model, the car shredding that's being done there is truly almost a new economy type of business, a very sustainable and a very green industry, in that you're taking all this amount of huge tonnage, as you point out, of cars, and you're turning it into new resources that go back to smelters and are made into the next generation of planes and infrastructure in India and China and in the United States.
And it's an international market. And it's funny that you mentioned Sanford and Son, because growing up, that was my only perception
mine too.
Of a scrap dealer.
Right.
And it's so far from what the truth is. And it's simply because this industry has not had a public presence in the past. It's been there for 100 years in the U.S., and metals have been recycled for thousands of years because of their value. So it's just that we don't see it in our everyday. So if you have the opportunity ever to go online and see how some of these processes are done, it's a highly advanced technological process that employs a lot of machinery. It's labor intensive still, but it's an industry that employs 138,000 people in the United States.
On SA Recycling's website, can we actually view the shredding of a car?
We will be there, but on the ISRI website, I'll direct you to isri.org.
ISRI.org.
You'll be able to find shredder videos of recycling ferrous, non-ferrous, plastics, tire, and so on.
Everything is right there.
Everything is right there.
That's wonderful. And so, as you say, what was a legacy industry is really a futuristic industry now, in that it's as green and sustainable as ever before, but it's now getting visibility, and it's really doing so much good for the environment and for the planet that all these car shredding facilities that SA Recycling owns and other of your colleagues and competitors, it's really part of the new green economy now.
Absolutely. You know, we have to move to a society of sustainability. Natural resource, the earth is limited.
Right.
You know, we can't produce more of what's here. So as we start to run down on certain commodities, recycling just becomes that more important.
So those 138,000 jobs that you just mentioned, they're really, as would be called under new terminology, green collar jobs. They're really part of the new green economy, even though they're a legacy industry.
Absolutely, and I love that term. I'm going to be using that too now. So thank you.
You talk about the international markets, Tom. When you now at SA Recycling, when you recycle all these cars, are you selling to domestic buyers? Are you selling to overseas buyers, or both?
Everywhere. We're located in 4 states, over 60 locations in California, Nevada, Arizona, California, and Texas. And the marketplace is international today. And it's hard to be in this business without having an international presence. We own and operate 2 dock loading facilities, so we can load bulk vessels, 45,000 tons of scrap steel at one time. We load containers of scrap steel for overseas shipments. We utilize rail for domestic shipments to the steel mills and service all the major steel mills in the U.S. and abroad. Wow. So it's a very diverse marketplace on the steel side. On the non-ferrous side, aluminums, stainless steel, coppers and brasses, and that's dependent on the market that's the most predominant consumer. China consumes 40% of the world's copper, so they're a natural buyer of copper products. Aluminum is a lot of it is smelted domestically. Because the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world. I have to take that back, because I think China surpassed us in dollars.
Right,
just
but we're
recently.
right there,
But
1 or 2.
We are at the top of the heap. So we still consume a lot of materials for the products that we consume here in the United States.
You know, we're sitting here at the ISRI convention, Tom. It's the 3rd week of April in 2015. Last August or so, oil was at $100 a barrel. We've seen a slide, almost a pro rata slide in every commodity platform, whether it's iron, oil, copper, silver, gold. What's the future of responsible recycling, like what you do at SA Recycling, what other responsible recyclers do who are members of ISRI and the greater ISRI organization, how is this going to affect the economics of recycling, and what's going to be the new normal? What's the visibility that you and George and other leaders in the industry see right now?
The difference is that we're subject to a world market.
Right.
We've looked to the world as a marketplace, and now we have to live within that realm. And one of the interesting things that has occurred, over the last 20 years has been the growth of China.
Right.
Which, I'll just take steel as an example. China's producing about 800 million tons per year of steel. They're consuming about 700 million tons internally.
Wow.
And they have to get rid of the other 100 million tons by selling it to other countries. The United States produces 100 million tons of steel and consumes about 100 million tons. So we're living in an economic or an economy, a world economy today, that we can't just manage ourselves locally. We have to look at what's going on in the rest of the world. China has been slowing, so demand has decreased. Europe has been in a recession for some time and is just starting to come back.
Right.
But when we look at the production, I'll start with oil, with fracking, all of a sudden we put on a lot of capacity and oversupplied a market that was actually decreasing in demand, so prices go down. Economics is very simple. It's supply, demand, and fear and greed, as I tell people, and those elements are always what are at play. So in the commodities market and the metals market, our consumers now are worldwide, as opposed to 50 years ago when most of it was bought and sold, within the United States as far as steel scrap.
Right.
So we have to watch what those markets do. There's always going to be demand for steel. There's always going to be demand for copper and aluminum. So you just have to readjust your business plan to accommodate what those worldwide markets are doing. And they're always cyclical. They go up, they go down. But today's paradigm has changed just a little bit with steel because of China's great production capacity, which is unprecedented. So it's changed the game plan a little bit for some people.
But what goes down eventually goes back up again. Do you feel bullish? Do you feel positive about the future in terms of whether it's a year from now or 3 years from now, that we're at a low right now on most of these commodities, not just steel, obviously, oil as well and others, that eventually we'll start seeing the demand go up and the rise of these commodities again?
Always. When there's too much supply, it gets cut back. When there's not enough, it gets produced. So again, it's all cyclical, and for those of us that have been in the business for years, we know there's cycles, and we don't panic when the market drops.
Got it.
Unfortunately, this last one was rather large, and everybody remembers the start of the Great Recession in 2008, and most recently in February we saw a drop in the steel markets here that on a percentage basis was actually larger than the drop that we saw in 2008. So
wow.
It requires a lot of adjusting, and we know some companies won't make it. There'll be some consolidation, but at the end of the day, healthy companies will survive. Companies that are doing the right thing will survive, doing it the right way will survive, and because there's a need and a demand for recycled commodities as we run shorter and shorter on raw materials, and the percentage that we can get out of, say, a copper mine that used to produce at 3% and is now producing at 1% or less, it becomes very expensive and difficult to extract.
So the future of car recycling and SA recycling is very bright, very hopeful.
Absolutely.
And the future of ISRI, of course, is evergreen, and so we're in a good position right now.
I'm always accused of being the eternal optimist, but my optimism has always paid off. So.
I love it. That's what we need more. We need more eternal optimists like you in this world that make the world a better place. And Tom, we thank you today for joining us on Green is Good. The world needs more people like you that make the world a better place. You are truly living proof that green is good. So thank you for your time today.
And thank you for helping us get the message out.
Very important. Again, this is John Shigarian and Tom Knippel here at the ISRI Convention in downtown Vancouver. Thank you for joining us at Green is Good. We'll see you on our next episode.